Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Hello everybody. Thank you all for coming out on this cold wintry night. I begin by praising our Creator and Fashioner, and I ask Him to bless all of us, all of the righteous people in all of the ages, and to bless especially His prophets and messengers through whom we have come to a better understanding of God. Now, tonight I will defend the proposition that religion is not dangerous. I come to this from a Muslim background, and obviously as a person of faith, one can expect that I wouldn't be saying that religion is dangerous. But if we are to be fair, then we must look at why people think that religion is dangerous and how do we counteract those accusations against religion. Well, let's look at the question more generally. Religion. What is religion? If someone says that religion is dangerous, then one would have to have a definition of religion. And likewise, if one says religion is not dangerous, one would have to be defining what exactly do we mean by religion. Religion, as Dr. Keith Ward in his book, Is Religion Dangerous, points out, is not easy to define. But we can point to things that we commonly know to be religion, such as what are commonly described as the world's great religions. They include Hinduism, Buddhism, and the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, some of the younger faiths like Sikhism and Baha'ism. Now, among these religions, one can ask what would qualify as danger from these religions. One might say that religion leads to a non-scientific sort of thinking. But that's not necessarily true, because some of the greatest religious thinkers are also philosophers, and they have been in the past and continue to be now scientists and inventors in many different fields. One might say that religion gives rise to a myopic sort of thinking, an us versus them. But that's not necessarily true either. Most of the people of religion in the world are neighbors with people of other religions, and they get along very well. While one may be enthused about one's own religious beliefs, and one might find guidance and direction through one's own beliefs, one would not necessarily see that as a reason for divisiveness between people. One of the common accusations is that religion gives rise to violence. And this accusation recently has gained momentum, especially with reference to the religion of Islam. And so I'll have to say something about that. It is true that many acts of violence recently have been committed in the name of Islam. Young jihadists have strapped bombs to themselves, and they have blown up things like school buses and buildings. The biggest manifestation of that being the events of 9/11, 2001. And one might ask, well, doesn't this prove that religion is violent? I'd like to show you a book which I've read in preparation for tonight's event, a book entitled A World Without Islam. The book is written by Graham Fuller, and he is a former vice chairman of the National Intelligence Council at the CIA. Now, he wrote this book, and the title of the book, A World Without Islam, reflects his thesis that even if there was no Islam in the world, there will still be a division between East and West. Many of the conflicts that we attribute to the religion of Islam, and we think, well, this shows that Islam is against the West, he's saying that in fact these are geopolitical crises that would have existed anyhow, even if there wasn't such a thing as the religion of Islam. The manifestation that we're noticing, where young men do take things into their own hands and they kill themselves and others in the name of Islam, that too, according to this author, is not necessarily coming out of Islam, but it's more linked to the geopolitical situations from which these young men emerge. A similar point has been made, incidentally, in the book that I referred to earlier by title, I show it to you now, a book entitled Is Religion Dangerous? By Keith Ward. Professor Ward was a philosopher and teacher of philosophy at Oxford University in the United Kingdom. So what are these authors saying? What is this thing about geopolitical situations that give rise to this sort of violence? There has been a long history of political interference by what we're referring to as the West into what are generally known as Muslim lands. Let's take a case in point. In 1953, a leader was democratically elected in Iran. His name was Mohammed Mossadegh. But then there was a coup as a result of which he was overthrown. Last year in August, the Guardian newspaper in the United Kingdom published an article saying that, and this has been verified from other sources as well, this should just be accepted as a fact, the Guardian newspaper just highlighted this, that some previously secret documents in the United States had now become declassified, and these documents show that the CIA and MI6 in the UK, these secret organizations, were at the background of making this coup happen. What was the purpose of overthrowing Mohammed Mossadegh, who was democratically elected? Well, the main purpose was the West's interest in securing a regular supply of oil at low prices. Mohammed Mossadegh had the idea of nationalizing the oil industry, and that was not very good for the West. It was good for the people who this man was governing, who elected him to govern. It was good for his own people, but not good for the West. The result, he's overthrown in a coup through this kind of secret operation. So you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. Though these things happen in secret, people get some sense of what is happening, and this builds up a series of resentments, compacted upon resentment, and it gives rise eventually to some young men taking matters into their own hands, out of desperation, doing what they have done. Is that Islamic? No. Do the teachings of Islam condone that? No. Do the teachings of Islam condemn such actions? Yes. In the Quran, we have, for example, in the 2nd chapter, verse number 256, La ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in religion. In the 4th chapter, in the 29th verse, we are told, do not destroy yourselves, because God is merciful to you. So suicide is ruled out. Similarly, in the 2nd chapter of the Quran, in the 187th verse, do not throw yourself to destruction with your own hands. So suicide is ruled out. And yet, this is what these young men are doing to themselves. If we go into a legitimate battle for good reasons, when other means of achieving peace and justice fail, can we harm non-combatants? No, this is also very clear. The Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, is on record as having taught his followers that they're not to harm non-combatants. If it's a battle, it's only a battle between soldiers. The women, the children, the monks in their hermits, non-combatants in general should be left unharmed. So if somebody says, I am defending the Muslim populace by fighting against the aggressors in order to drive them out of Muslim lands, and then he uses a means such as this, which causes his own death and the deaths of innocent civilians, well, this is un-Islamic, and we should have no hesitation in condemning all of this. Why are they doing this? They're doing out of desperation. It is commonly noted in these books and other sources which I've consulted that suicide bombing and other such guerrilla tactics are the weapons of desperate people. In fact, a University of Chicago professor, Pape, has written a book entitled Dying to Win. And in that book, he has shown that the suicide vest was first invented by the Tamil Tigers. That has nothing to do with Islam, and only subsequently was it then adopted by Muslim jihadists in in perpetrating their own suicide missions. He has surveyed suicide missions from 1980 onwards, and he has shown that the critical element in suicide missions is the desire and aim of these suicide missionaries, if you want to call them that, the jihadists and others outside of the Islamic faith, their aim to drive out foreign occupiers from their land. So how do we deal with this as a community and as a populace? Well, some of the recommendations are given by Graham Fuller in his book towards the end. For example, that the West should withdraw from occupying and being present in Muslim lands. Second, we need to solve the Palestinian problem and remove the injustice that is being inflicted upon the Palestinian people, and other such suggestions. If we had more time, we'll give you a longer list. But these are the things that we need to think about so that we can get rid of this problem. Muslims need to deal with this problem internally, and non-Muslims need to deal with this problem externally as well. But in short, I can conclude tonight by saying that religion is not dangerous. People can be dangerous, and they conscript the name of religion to perpetrate their dangers upon society and seek justification thereby. Thank you very much.
Hello, very pleased to be invited here tonight and represent all the non-believers on the horizon. I wanted to clarify some terms in using my introduction. And first of all, please understand that the agnostic philosophy is a philosophy about all knowledge. So we are concerned that we have empirical evidence, either scientific or social, before we accept something as being true. The term postmodern atheist confuses people. It's sometimes referred to as non-theist. In other words, a person who says simply, I don't believe in God, as opposed to the traditional atheist who says there is no God. Really significant difference in philosophy. Secular humanists are those of us who believe that in the absence of God we can be good, that we have a philosophy that lends us to lead a good life, that's morally responsible, socially responsible. And our goal in the absence of an afterlife is to leave a legacy behind us. So that's how the perspective I'm going to look at tonight. So the question is religion dangerous? And I'm going to deal with two aspects of that. Is religion dangerous generally? And is religion dangerous to atheists? And the answer to both is yes. Just in the same way that guns and knives are dangerous, depends who picks them up. So basically, we have to understand that in human nature, there are three factors that we secular humanists look at in terms of human behavior. The first one is tribalism. And tribalism really sometimes is called the desire to be sociable. We like to gather in groups. And when we do that, we tend to gather with people who are of the same mind as we are. So it could be a university team, it could be your church group, it could be anything like that. In a sense, it's a tribe in which you share same things. And for the most part, that's positive. We all know all kinds of examples of church groups who do positive things, food banks and charities and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, this tribalism can turn ugly if one tribe decides that it has the absolute answer to truth and it is the only good tribe in the neighborhood. And that the other tribes are wrong, and by being wrong they are evil and therefore threatening. And when that happens, we get violence. Unfortunately, religion sometimes does that, or at least people in religions get that idea. Doesn't happen all the time, doesn't happen often, but when it does, the consequences are really tragic. And we all know the examples, Northern Ireland, the Middle East, etc., etc. The second characteristic of human beings is what is called the dopamine response. And this is a little nice thing that our brain does for us when we do something we think is good. If we smile at someone, we get a little shot of this endorphin and we feel good. If we let someone open the door for someone at Tim Hortons, it's a positive thing, we feel good. until we realize that now they're in front of us in line. But other than that, you know, so there's all kinds of things we do. The problem with that is that the sense of good is subjective. So what I think I'm doing is good may not be good. So I may take a friend aside and say, expert on hairstyles that I am, your hair doesn't look quite right today. And I may think I'm doing that person a favor, and I'll feel good about that. But the person I've talked to is upset because they just spent hours on it and they happen to know about the latest hairstyles that I don't. Doesn't affect my nice dopamine response because I'm happy for the next few minutes, but I've done something that isn't really very good. Unfortunately, this can be used by people who get involved in religion in that they convince people that doing something that is really not good is good. And they do so by telling them that there's a great afterlife waiting for you. All you have to do is commit this act. How many people were burned at the stake in Europe by people who were convinced that they were actually doing them a favor because they were burning the demons out of them and they were going to get into heaven. Just all kinds of horrible acts have been done, not by most religions, but now in these enlightened times, but certainly in the past. So religion is vulnerable. People who get involved in religion can be vulnerable to be convinced to do things that are wrong. The third thing that we look at is reason. And reason for us secular humanists is the thing that balances those two, because of course we're just as subject to the subjectivism of tribalism and of the dopamine response as anyone else. What we like to try to do is step back and think about it for a minute and say, is this really doing something good, or do I just think it is? And so reason for us is the control, or the third leg of the tripod, that gives us secular humanist ethics. Now, religion, from our perspective, tends to reduce the need for reason. It tends to ask people to forego reason to accept faith. In other words, you know, believe me, this is true. Take this on faith. In fact, that's the major reason that I left religion when I was 15 or 16 years of age, because when I started to ask questions in my first steps of learning how to use empirical evidence, the minister said, oh, there, just accept it on faith and you'll find out later. No, it didn't work for me, obviously. It must have worked for some of my friends. But my concern here is that religions can or de-emphasize the need for reason. So those are three reasons I think that religion can be dangerous for the general populace. Is religion dangerous for atheists? Absolutely. The International Humanist and Ethical Union, which sits on the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, did a study in 2013 called the Freedom of Thought Study, and what it did was examine the laws of 194 sovereign nations around the world and compared those laws to how they would work with Section 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, vis-a-vis the treatment of atheists. And they came up with 44 parameters and 5 categories. The first of these categories is those countries that treat people as free, atheists as free and equal. 8% of the nations of the world treat atheists as free and equal. Canada, by the way, is not one of them. The other end of the scale are countries that commit grave violations of atheist human rights. 17% of the country studies had laws that persecuted and execute atheists just for being non-believers. 13 of those countries have execution orders on atheists. So is it dangerous? Yes. I should tell you that all of those countries in that 17% are theocracies. They're all countries that have a religious or a religion at the helm. By the way, to put it in perspective, Canada falls into what's called systemic discrimination, which means that there are laws in our country that discriminate against atheists. It tends to be a discrimination by favoritism, so it's not as nasty as some of the laws in some of the other countries. For example, the National Anthem Act favors religion, but there's no law against publishing different words to the national anthem, which Secular Connexion Séculaire has already done. So what do we do about this? Well, I think first of all, as secular humanists, we abhor violence in any way. We just see that as being antisocial. And so we will work and talk against violence. We have to really ask religions to take responsibility for people who claim to be part of that religion, whatever it is, and make sure that you are saying to them, this is forbidden. You must not do this. And to continue, as they're already doing, to promote peace and nonviolence. In terms of our own government, we secular humanists are lobbying them very hard to work to get some kind of protection for those atheists in the countries where they're being persecuted and executed as we speak. Unfortunately, our Office of Religious Freedoms seems to need to be dragged kicking and screaming into that foray. They are very reticent to be involved in anything but defending religions. So that's something we have to work on. But really, as a society, we all have to work on this, regardless of whether you belong to a faith or not. Thank you.
First of all, I want to express my appreciation to the people who have been involved in organizing this event. The number of people in the world that are involved with some sort of religion, as well as the recent upswing in the number of people in North America who are becoming more superstitious, is an indication that discussions like the one we're having this evening is an important discussion to have. I want to briefly state or explain what my own religious perspective is, and then I want to move in to address the primary question. I would describe myself as a Christian, but to understand what I mean by that, I need to define the essence of Christianity and then maybe two major categories of Christians. The essence of Christianity has several different factors to it. Obviously, one of the primary ones is that there is a God, and God in the New Testament is described as the one who is the origin of every good thing given and every perfect gift. And that would include the origin of beauty, the origin of perfect honor and love, origin of flawless justice, of music, art, the laws of nature, and every other good thing. The problem, though, one of the second points in the essence is that all of us have violated our own moral intuitions from time to time, and if we've done that, how much further short of flawless justice have we fallen as humanity? So this creates a problem for God. Somehow the demands of flawless justice and perfect honor and love must both be satisfied. So one of the core beliefs in Christianity is that God became a human being to fully satisfy the demands of flawless justice so that he could then fully satisfy the demands of perfect honor and love. And his name was Jesus of Nazareth. So to become a Christian, a person must accept God's pardon for the things that they have done, that he offers us through Jesus of Nazareth. And that step, if taken, is what is described as putting your faith in Christ for forgiveness of sins and for the acceptance of eternal life. And the result is that one becomes spiritually alive, and God begins to change the person from the inside out to become the kind of person that God created that man or woman to be. Now, as far as two categories of Christians go, the first category would be those people who would claim to be Christians and are religious so far as observing certain rituals and traditions, but the way that they live contradicts the teachings of Jesus Christ. I would refer to these as contradictory Christians. The other kind would be the authentic Christian, the person who has sincerely put their faith in Jesus Christ, and they're now experiencing a personal relationship with God. And Jesus said that you could tell the difference between the two with a simple statement. He says, by their fruit you will know them. In other words, there should be a steady and ongoing positive change that occurs in that person over the months and years that follow after they claim to have put their faith in Christ. Now, the primary question, is religion dangerous? My short answer is yes and no. I will argue that there's at least two ways that religion can be a dangerous thing and two ways that it can be of great benefit. So the first danger is that religion is like national security. It can be misused to justify behavior that would otherwise be unacceptable, as we've seen this past year with the NSA after Mr. Snowden made his revelations. People do bad things. Often, they will attempt to justify what they do by doing it in the name of something that is respected or valued in a given society. For example, there are three famous examples where Christianity was misused to justify unacceptable behavior. And the stats I'm going to give come from Professor Rommel, political scientist, University of Hawaii. And these would be upper estimates, upper limits. First of all, there were the Crusades, and there were as many, according to Rommel's research, as many as 1 million people killed in the medieval Crusades. Then there was the Spanish Inquisition, right around 350,000 people killed in the Spanish Inquisition. And then there were the killings of women who were accused of being witches. And that estimate, according to Rommel's research, could be as high, the number of killed could be as high as 100,000 women in Europe mostly. The total brings to about just over 1.4 million people killed in the name of Christianity. But the question that you need to ask when you hear these things is this: is that what Jesus taught? Is that how Jesus treated people? Jesus said that the second greatest commandment was to love other people as you love yourself. So at best, these examples would be examples of the type of contradictory Christianity, that classification I spoke of earlier. So a danger of religion or anything else that's valued by a society is that it can be misused in an attempt to justify wrong behavior. The second danger is that religion can be like taking a wrong turn in a burning building or a sinking ship. New religions possibly are being invented even this evening as we have this discussion. They cannot all possibly be true in virtue of the fact that they're mutually contradictory in their core beliefs. Therefore, there must be a large number of bogus religions out there, and at the most, only one that could be completely true. Given the state of affairs, if it is true that your eternal destiny hinges on where you place your faith, then placing your faith in a religion invented by human beings could be actually the most dangerous thing that's possible to do in this life, like taking a wrong turn in a burning building, except that the consequences last forever. Well, one benefit of religion is that the belief that one's decisions and actions in this life have eternal consequences, and that there's a moral law that transcends societies and civilizations, which we will all be held accountable to someday, can have a significant positive influence in the behavior of people that can benefit society. For example, British journalist and atheist Matthew Paris wrote, and I quote, "As a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa. Christians, black and white, working in Africa, do heal the sick. They do teach people to read and write. Far from having cowed or confined its converts, their faith appeared to have liberated and relaxed them. There was a liveliness, a curiosity, an engagement with the world, a directness in their dealings with others that seemed to be missing in traditional African life. They stood tall." End of quote. A couple of years ago, CTV News reported that the Christian relief agency World Vision gives more to third world relief than all the other charities in the United States combined. And many of those charities are run by Christian-run charities as well. The last benefit that I would suggest is possibly for the individual. If there is a true religion that actually makes it possible to know the creator of the universe, the one who is the origin of beauty, honor, love, justice, music, and every good thing given, and every perfect gift, then it would be the most wonderful thing that that person could experience, that the individual In my own experience, I would have to say that by the most fulfilling thing that I've ever experienced in my life, by far, is experiencing the presence of God. In the Bible, it states, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, which have not even entered the minds of humanity. All these things God has prepared for those who love him. So in answer to the question, is religion dangerous? I've said yes and no. It can be invoked in an attempt to justify evil actions and atrocities. And also, if there are religions that are mere inventions of humanity, they can lead a person down the wrong road, or even to the conclusion that all religions are false. But there are also pro-social benefits to certain religions, and if it's actually possible to know God, and if there actually is a true religion through which that can happen, then that religion is the key to the most wonderful thing that a human could possibly experience.
So, this is, as they say, age before beauty, right? So, is religion dangerous? Well, it's also hard going last because, like, everyone has said a lot of what I wanted to say. But, just give me a second to turn my notes on. Okay, so is religion dangerous? Absolutely. Religion is the worst. So what do I mean by that? Religions can be an authoritative structure which doesn't allow for questions or challenges. That kind of structure is dangerous. When religion's a way for human beings to feel superior to others, to judge others, that's when religion is dangerous. When religion is a competition for the truth, it's dangerous. When religion is a way for just one of many means for evil people to manipulate others to serve their own needs, it's dangerous. But human beings don't need religion to do that. In the 20th century, the rest of the world got rid of religion and gave rise to wonderful, wonderful universal concepts like Nazism and communism. Right? Those are dangerous too. They didn't need religion for that. Ultimately, when religion is about knowledge, I know that there is a God, and I know that my version of God is right. That's when religion is dangerous. So, religion can also be a uniquely powerful tool for good. And that's when religion is about belief. When it's about belief, it can provide human beings with access to ancient wisdom traditions of what it means to be a human being in this world, which can help find value and add meaning to a person's life. Religion is access to true and timeless moral behavior. Morals come and go with the fads of the world, just like anything else. And many people in ancient Rome, it was fashionable to have young boys as lovers. That was moral at the time. But religion many religions have experienced all these fads and have weeded out the ones that aren't really, truly good. Religion can show a person the cosmic insignificance of their own selfish needs and desires, and the inherent significance in kindness for kindness' sake. Religion can inspire people to do what's right when there's no obvious benefit. When the doer of kindness only gets a smile in return. And religion can inspire people to do what's right when no one's watching, when no one's going to smile. And religion ultimately is a means for overcoming the inherent selfishness of human nature. A religion that believes that you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. A religion that can stomach multiple paths of truth is a religion that's not dangerous. So I'm a rabbi, I have to teach you a little bit about Judaism. Judaism, basic teaching is that human beings need to be good people. It's not that Jews need to be good people, it's that the world needs to be good people. The definition of a good person, or who goes to heaven, it's not defined by what religion a person practices. It's actually not defined by belief at all. It's defined by your actions. If you do good things, you're a good person. And if you do bad things, you're a person who does bad things. You do good things too. So the Jewish mystical approach to the world, Kabbalah, as Madonna has made famous, it teaches that the world is a broken place. Every single act that a human being does, it makes the world either a little bit better or a little bit worse. The Jewish religion is a timeless wisdom tradition with advice on how to maximize the efficiency on how to fix the world, how to have the largest possible ripple effect of goodness on the world around you. Ultimately, religion should teach you humility. When a person recognizes that they believe something to be true, but they don't know, then they can see the value in what others believe to be true as well. If a person is defined by a need to be right, when religion feeds their ego, when religion confirms for a person everything that they need to believe, that's when it leads to danger. But when religion is a tool for bettering oneself, for recognizing there's something bigger than oneself, then ultimately it's the opposite of dangerous. It's the most useful tool in the world. And I will end there.
At this point, we have 2 microphones between 4 people, and the 4 of you are invited to engage in conversation. And I don't know which one of you has that first itching question to get this conversation started, but I'm hoping one of you does.
I can go. Yeah? Go for it. Okay, I have a question for Doug. Doug, you spoke about somebody opening up the door for someone at Tim Hortons, let's say, and then only to be sorry later on when you see that the person is ahead of you in line. But of course, some religious people, and even non-religious people, may not only be happy to open the door, but to let the person go ahead, and also to reach over and even pay for whatever that person is purchasing, and then feel good at the end of the day. And that's not necessarily a religious person. Even an atheist or a non-religious person might feel good about doing that as well. And you spoke about the dopamine effect, right? But deep down, for religious people, the doing good is not because it makes us feel good and gives us a shot of dopamine or something like this. But for religious people, our doing good is a reflection of the purpose for which God created us. Now, it seems to religious people that on the atheistic worldview, there is no such underlying philosophy that propels a person to do good. I mean, an atheist can do good if he wants to, but he doesn't have to want to. And that's the difference to me. And I want you to comment on that difference. This is what Immanuel Kant referred to as the categorical imperative, that you ought to do good. That's what the religious person will say, even if he or she is not necessarily doing good, but there's an idea that we ought to do good because God created us as a reflection of his goodness for the purpose of reflecting that goodness in our own lives. So for an atheist then, what would be the underlying philosophy behind doing good? I'd like you to speak to that.
Sure. First of all, understand that I'm a secular humanist, so I want to tell you that that's my bias. It's a little different than being an atheist, which is, an atheist is kind of a small part of being a secular humanist. So the fact that God does or does not exist is, pardon me for sounding insulting, not very important to us. But it's just that, and there are all kinds of philosophers through the ages, Confucius, who originated the saying, do unto others, and tons of many other Greek philosophers, all of whom pointed out that we have a better society, a better life, if the people around us have a better life. So my motivation for doing good things for people is simply that it makes for a better society. Humanism, secular humanism, is not so much a philosophy as it is a euphaxology. In other words, it is common observation that doing good things, in fact, bring back good things. What goes around comes around. The difference for us, too, is that we don't look at there being some kind of remote reward after death. As far as we're concerned, death, and Epicurus pointed out that we don't fear death because when death is present, when we are present, death is not, and when death is present, we are not. So we look each day to figure out how we can make society and the people around us better, and that's rooted in all kinds of philosophical, from information from Confucius all the way up to Bertrand Russell, Robert Buckman, June Callwood. And so, and you'll find that somebody asked me the other day, well, where are all the Canadian humanist writings? Well, the Canadians are kind of realists. And so you really have to look to people like June Callwood, who didn't write, and she was a journalist, who didn't write so many things about being good. She just was good. She was the person that founded the first AIDS clinic in Toronto. She founded the first home for unwed mothers. So humanists feel that doing these things and seeing the world around us improved is our motivation. And that's why we understand that people who have religion will do these things because they feel that they're serving God's plan, or their God's plan. We, in the absence of God in our philosophy, simply look at it and say we do better if we improve the society around us. And that means stopping thinking just because that person disagrees with me, that shouldn't matter. So that's really how we secular humanists, non-theists work. Okay, thank you.
So I have a question for Shabir and Kirk, for both of you, I guess.
You planned this. This is why Doug gave me this mic, you see.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a humanist plan.
The Jewish Bible teaches that all human beings are created in the image of God. I mean, there's an inherent equality to all human beings, regardless of their faith, of their practice, of wherever they are. Is there a similar teaching in your religious understanding? Do all human beings have equal value, or does there prioritize to the people of a certain faith according to your worldview?
Go ahead first.
Well, go ahead, Kirk. Yeah.
Well, I would have, because Christians actually also hold the Old Testament or the Jewish scriptures to be the Word of God. My answer to the question of the value of a human being, it is contingent on the essence of what makes a person, what makes us human, and that is, as Dan said, we are created in the image and likeness of God. And so it's completely independent of anything else, of how you look, of how wealthy you are, how athletic you are or lack thereof, and so forth. It is contingent upon only one thing, and that is, are you created in the image and likeness of God? And we believe you are. The second greatest command that Jesus gave was to love your neighbor as yourself. And by neighbor, he told a parable that basically means any human being. So there again, there's that principle where all people are to be treated, are to be valued. All people have equal value and significance, and we ought to treat them that way.
Yeah, in the Islamic tradition, it is mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, خَلَقَ اللَّهُ آدَمَ فِي صُورَتِهِ, that God created Adam in his likeness. The interpretation of that is another matter, but the basic idea that human beings are all equal and in the image of God in some way, at least in a spiritual way, is widely accepted among Muslims. In the 17th chapter of the Quran, we read that God has ennobled the children of Adam. So this is all human beings from the Islamic point of view. In the 49th chapter of the Quran, in the 11th verse, it says that God created you from a male and female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know each other. And certainly the most honorable among you are those who are more aware of God. So this is something internal to the person and cannot be judged by the rest of us. We can't know who is more aware of God than the other person. We can't even judge it by outward actions because somebody may feel inwardly totally overawed with and in love with God, but for some reason that is not manifested in the person's actions. And somebody else may be performing all of the ritual actions that we're familiar with that marks a person off as being religious, but inside the person could be filled with hypocrisy and hate and greed and all the evils that you can imagine. So it is up to God to know who is closer to God than the other person, but certainly that cannot be judged by race or language or ethnicity or anything like that.
Sure. I've been offered the opportunity to ask a follow-up question. So, to ask more specifically, how does each of your religions view the non-Christian or the non-Muslim?
Just like any other human being. It would be, they're human, they're created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore they have enormous value and significance, and it's got nothing to do with my opinion. It's what God thinks of the person, and this is what God thinks, and therefore I go along with that. I mean, I have to acknowledge that. It's irrelevant from my perspective whether a person is Muslim or non-Christian or atheist or of some particular ethnic group or is serving time for mass murder in a penitentiary or is Mother Teresa herself. All these things are relevant when it comes to value and significance, that all are valued in an unquantifiable way by God, because they're created in His own image and likeness. Now, what image and likeness means, that's another question. People, wonder about that, but...
Yeah, Kirk, I think if I understand Daniel's question, it's more like, do you think that non-Christian people will eventually be saved? Is that your question, Daniel? That's a good question. Yeah?
Well, everybody ultimately, I believe that we have free will, and the reason that I believe that is because as a Christian, it appears to me that we can do things that God does not like, and the Bible is full of accounts of things where people did this, that, and the other thing, and God did not like that. So I infer from that we have free will. And the first and foremost command that Jesus gave was to love the Lord our God with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind. Now, love is only meaningful if it's a matter of your own free choice, whether you want to be involved in that or not. So ultimately, whether we spend eternity with God or without God boils down to our own free will decision with regard to what we do when God intervenes in our life and draws us, each individual, to Himself. We can either choose to reject that or accept that. So from Jesus' perspective, He says, no, not all people will want to spend eternity with God. Not all people will be, even the religious people, and He spoke, and I'll talk about Christians here, He said there'll be many on Judgment Day who said, God, Lord, didn't we do this in your name and that in your name? And He's talking to people who are doing it in the name of Jesus. So He's talking about people who claim to be Christians. And Jesus will say, well, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness, because I never knew you. And so it's more than just taking a name. It's more than just what my parents wear. It's my own free choice to either follow the teachings of Jesus or not. And the teachings were summed up in those two great commands: love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And coupled with this idea of accepting his pardon for the things that I'd done that were wrong.
Yeah, for my answer to that, I would say that the classical Islamic tradition was often interpreted in an exclusivist manner. It was thought by many classical Muslim theologians that if one did not become a Muslim, then one would be doomed forever to eternal punishment. But that was not uncontested, in that many also said that we have to think about the case of a person who hasn't heard the message, or hasn't heard the message in the right way, or fully, or in a persuasive manner. And in that case, such person will be judged according to whatever message from God had reached him or her, or reached them in a clear and persuasive way. In which case, there is an openness here to thinking that there are people who are non-Muslim and they are following some tradition that they're convinced to be the truth from God, and they're sincerely seeking this as a way to God, and that's the best that could be expected from them, and they too will be saved. In my own thinking about this, I think that I've come to see that even the idea of the exclusivist even the exclusivist idea that I first described is not actually rooted in clear teachings from the Quran itself. A verse from the Quran that says, Inna dina inda Allahi al-Islam, the religion with God is Islam, has been pressed forward in this way to prove exclusivity. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. A book entitled The Islamic Roots of Democratic Pluralism by Abdulaziz Sachedina has explained this verse in another way. The word Islam itself nowadays is used to mean the religion named Islam, but the word itself in Arabic means submission to God. And so that verse could just simply be saying that if one submits to God, then one really has the right religion. The idea of submission to God then for Muslims is broad. We read it in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus said, not my will but yours be done, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. So he was submitting his will to God. That means for Muslims that Jesus was a submitter to God, and therefore in Islamic terms he was a Muslim. And so the idea of Muslim is actually broader than this, and so it does not seem to me right for Muslims to say that only Muslims will go to heaven, if they mean only followers of the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace. We should think more broadly that God has sent prophets and messengers, or at least he has given a conscience in human beings that guides human beings to what is right and what is good, and every person has a certain range of options open to him or her. There's only so far we can see, and within that range of options, some people are picking the good things and some people are picking the bad things. While those who are picking the good things, in the eyes of God, to me, these are the good people, and they will get their just rewards. And the others who are picking the bad things within their range of options are obviously also going to get their just desserts for their choices.
Is that the end of the Q&A, or do I have time to ask them? Okay, I'm going to ask this of Doug, because I think Dan and Shabir have both answered this. It has to do with our moral grounds. What is good? Now, you say that we ought to help one another and so forth because it makes for a better society. But it appears, let's say we observe someone, a pedophile, for example, assaulting a little child. Is it wrong merely because that doesn't benefit society, or is there another deeper, more profound moral law that's being violated here? And if so, what is the grounds for that law? Or is it just simply wrong because it's not a benefit to society?
You have to understand, first of all, let me clarify something. People are using the word atheism or atheist as if it's a philosophy, and it's not. Atheist is to philosophy as the flash is to a picture. All that atheism says, or the atheist statement, is there is no God. That's not a philosophy. The philosophy comes from looking at situations such as Kirk has just described and using reason to figure out why is that wrong. And of course, you know, instinctively, we protect our young. I mean, all animals do that, right? Mama bears do, and so on. So it's inherently wrong, and what we would say is that a child does not have the power in many ways to make a decision about that act. So I mean, when we look at that, what you're doing is someone who has the power to make the decision about that sexual act, talking or interacting with someone who does not have the power to make that act. And for us, that is wrong. And it would apply equally to someone who, for whatever reason, economically or socially or mentally, cannot make that decision. So we know the term between two consenting adults. The intent of that phrase is to, in legal terms at least, say, look, these two people have equal ability to make a decision about that act. So it's that power that the pedophile is exercising over the child that is wrong. And we need, therefore, to protect people who are powerless. And that's a concept that simply makes society work better. And we don't think that you need a law about that. Just as, for example, we think slavery is wrong. And yet, and that's a fairly modern concept. None of the ancient philosophers, including Jesus, said anything about slavery in any detail. Epicurus certainly didn't. Our philosophers certainly didn't. Why? Because it was a normal part of their life. And slaves were not, in the sense that we know them, always abused. But when you have that, whether it's a pedophile and a child, or someone who's bigger as a bully than someone else, we must understand that if you can't make an equal reasoned decision about what's going on, then there needs to be some protection in place for you. Because reason, for us, is the key to moral and ethical stability.
I'm confident that the four of you could carry on with conversations until the wee hours of the morning, but I do want to give everyone here the opportunity to ask questions of you as well.
Okay, so to the Christian representative, the scientist, how do you reconcile the idea of creation with the overwhelming evidence for evolution? If you do believe in creation, how do you justify rejecting evolution? And if you do believe in evolution, how do you justify believing parts of the Bible and not the others?
Well, right to start off with, it's logically the Darwinian, the origin and diversification of life, and God's creative effort behind it is logically compatible. So from a theological perspective, that is an option. Like, for example, when God said, let the earth bring forth, and then life and after its kind, there's no explanation whatsoever as to how the earth was supposed to bring forth life. We make assumptions about how that's supposed to happen, but in reality, it just simply does not explain itself there. It is an enormous topic. It's fascinating. It's one of the reasons I went into biophysics, actually. If I had problems with the Darwinian theory, it's scientific, not theological. There are some significant issues. One issue was just published this week again, and it's been on the back burner for the last couple of years. It has to do with orphan genes. But in order to appreciate well, what they're saying about orphan genes, I'd have to give a fair amount of background information, which there's no time to do. All I can say is I don't know how God created, how God actually did it. I have my doubts about at least the standard neo-Darwinian theory. There's some problems there. But I think we are making a mistake if we jump to conclusions, say, therefore, this is the way it happened, or that's the way it happened. I think one needs to be very careful about it, defending positions that we need to learn a lot more about. So I'm sitting back and enjoying the search. and the acquisition of knowledge. And as time goes on, I think more interesting things are surfacing.
Awesome, thanks.
All right. Yeah, I'm a little height challenged. Okay, Orion Edwards. So I have a question for the rabbi. You're a rabbi, right? David? Daniel. All right. Oh, Daniel, sorry. So the question is that, so are you basing salvation on whether you're good outweighs the bad? And how do you know if it does? Like, what if you're a good person, like, at the beginning of your life, and then near the end, like, you turn bad, or vice versa?
Okay, so just for the word salvation, we're using, Western, or I don't know, maybe more of a Christian topic in general. Judaism as a religion focuses a lot more on this world than on the afterlife. But I get your question. So a great rabbi by the name Maimonides basically explains that you don't know, you never know. And so you should always live your life like you're a scale that's tipped in the balance, and every action you make can tip that scale one direction. Right? And so that's just the way to make decisions in life, to always say, this could be the one act that I just need to make to tip that scale in my direction. And ultimately, one of the most important concepts in Judaism is repentance, which is what you're asking about. The idea that I can feel sorry for what I did, admit that I did something wrong, and try to fix that action is the ultimate goal. It's one of very few, Judaism is a religion of commandments, not actions. The act of repenting, of feeling sorry and trying to fix our mistakes is one of the very few acts that is required of a person every day, every minute, any day. And so absolutely, a person should always work on themselves. That's really the goal of life, is to be working towards progress. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, I have a question for the atheist.
All right, atheist.
Where sorry.
Secular humanist.
Sorry. I thought you were atheist, sorry. Do you not believe in, since religion is based principally around morals, why would you, if the morals, oh, sorry, never mind.
I guess this is to whom it may concern. Doug spoke on the necessity for religions to take responsibility for their participants, and of course the easy answer to that question is, well, of course, these individuals who perform acts such as suicide, such as the Crusades, are not accurate representations of that religion. That's fine and well, but at what point do we need to actually take responsibility for the fact that they, regardless of whether they're fundamentally sound in their beliefs, are actually taking the name of Christianity and assigning it to them, or the name of Islam and assigning it to their actions?
I suppose both Shabir and I are going to have to answer that one. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Did you want to say something about that, Doug?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I want to plagiarize from you.
Yeah, I think the question is valid. We cannot always say these are good Muslims, bad Muslims, good Christians, bad Christians, and it's only the bad ones that do all of these bad things. We have to ask, is there something in the religion itself that perhaps needs to be looked at more carefully? In terms of the Islamic faith, it is true that the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, went in battle, and one can, when pressed in circumstances, as we described, the youth are looking at the failed Muslim states, the occupation of Muslim lands by non-Muslim forces and so on, and they build up a sort of resentment, which now they're looking for some way of getting back, and they go back into the Islamic tradition and they dish out certain things and they highlight that. There are things in other sacred scriptures as well which we don't see people misusing now, and according to Keith Ward and others, This is because the same circumstances are not there. People are not pressed in the same way, and so they're not through desperation looking for something like this. Still, we should ask, can we weed out even these things so that nobody in a moment of desperation goes and reaches for that? So we need to look closely at the way in which Islam has been represented in the classical tradition. All of the us versus them, the world of peace versus the world of war, all of this kind of terminology we need to revise and see as belonging to a past in which the world was actually divided, not because of religion and non-religion, but that's just the way people were. They were divided for a large number of different factors, and religion was just one of them. It's not religion that caused the division, but it was the closed-mindedness of people that looked at anything different as being something worthy of rejection and to be excluded. So when we look at all of this in our tradition, we can, in fact, help the youth to think of Islam as a religion of peace, as a religion that should never be misused for violent ends, and as a religion that preaches that Muslims should live with others in peace and harmony and mutual love and understanding. So yes, we cannot just simply say this is the actions of bad Muslims, and we need to look at the things that they are misusing and try to see if there is a way of eliminating those things so that they're not there anymore to be misused.
To give you the Christian perspective on your answer, I suspect that what you're concerned about here is what's known as the no true Scotsman fallacy, where people just ad hoc want to distance themselves from this and say, well, for example, no true Scotsman would drink Irish whiskey upon finding out that there were some people who drank Irish whiskey, and then finding out that another Scotsman had done such and such, and well, no true Scotsman would do that, and it's just an arbitrary ad hoc distancing of oneself and making up rules, for example, on what disqualifies a person from being a follower of, say, a true Scotsman, in this case, Christianity. So the question is, these atrocities, things that people would do in the name of Christianity, are we just ad hoc saying, well, no true Christian would do this and no true Christian would do that? But if Jesus Christ himself was very, very explicit about what you ought to do and warning us that those people that do claim to be, he says, what you say means nothing. It's the words. I mean, it's your actions. It's the fruit that that tells you whether or not that person is a true follower of Christ or not. So the commands are simple. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. So when you see, let's say, for example, somebody committing murder in the name of Christianity, you just have to right off the bat say, was that what Jesus taught? Obviously no. What's the criteria that disqualifies yourself from being a true, authentic Christian? Well, Jesus said, you say you are, but in fact your words, your actions say something contradictory. So that's the real thing, the difference between the no true Scotsman fallacy and having something that's not ad hoc, something that's laid out right from day one by definition of what Christ considered a true Christian and not a true Christian.
Can I clarify what a secular humanist would say about that? It's not what religion says that is the problem. I mean, I think a lot of the things in the gospel and what I've read of the Quran have some very positive things to say about how we should behave. It's not what religion says, it's the structure of religion that is the problem. Because religion, by definition, religio does mean order of power, is putting the power at the top, and that the individual who follows that religion doesn't totally make individual decisions. So the problem with and it is the true Scotsman's argument, that when religions distance themselves from people that they don't think are good, whatever, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Baha'i, whatever, is that it doesn't really solve any problem. It is the inherent difficulty for us secular humanists is that people, and part of secular humanism is you have to accept that you are ultimately responsible for your actions. You are totally responsible for your actions. There is no God's plan. There is no directive from someone else. And yes, we read philosophy and we read people to get some guidance and some touchstones. But ultimately, I am responsible for my actions and for the consequences of those actions. And it doesn't matter how much I repent or apologize. You know, the world record for apologies has obviously been taken by the Toronto mayor, but it doesn't matter how many times that man apologizes. It doesn't erase that. And it's, to me, the structural problem with religions is that there is the rule, and if you don't follow the rule, then you're not part of that philosophy. But the very structure itself lends itself to abuse because it allows people to convince other people to do bad things because it's what they say is good.
Just to clarify, I would say we are totally responsible for what we do. I mean, that's the teachings of the scriptures, that every person will individually be held responsible. So it's not, I know what organized, I can sympathize for a certain extent what you say, and that's the danger of certain types of organized religion, that even within Christianity, that's decree this, that, and the other thing, and the people don't think. But ultimately, that is not what Jesus was teaching, just to do what people told you to do, but rather to take responsibility incomplete for one's actions.
But he didn't invent the religion. Paul put the religion together later, and that's where the religio part comes, where the hierarchy of the Pope and the cardinals, etc. And in all the Christian religions, there is a similar hierarchy. So I'm not blaming Jesus for this. You know, it's not his fault.
Okay, next question. Next question.
Would we be better off as a human race? Did you hear that? Okay. Without religion, would we be better off as a human race? Would we be better people? And if religion is in fact created by humans, what is the point of religion?
Yeah, I assume. Well, I mean, obviously, as a secular humanist, for me, personally, religion is pointless. It doesn't fit into my philosophy that I would appoint someone to say, okay, they're going to judge me on something. I'm responsible for judging myself. Would the world be better without religions? I'm not convinced that it would be. Remember, I said that the problem with religions is it's like the gun or the knife. It depends on who picks it up. So there are all kinds of good things happen because of religion. So there's no reason for me, and as a secular humanist, we're not interested particularly in slamming religion or suggesting that religion should thaw, melt, and dissolve itself into a dew. We simply say that it's not for us, that we prefer to follow the concept of living day by day and being good without God. So secular humanism is a philosophy that only really works for non-theists. I'm not even sure it works for atheists. But I don't know. It's kind of an unanswerable question because we've never been without it. So, you know.
Can I say something about that?
Oh, all right.
Am I allowed to add something here? Yeah. You see, on the non-theistic worldview, a person can decide to be good if he wants to be good. But we have no reason to say to another person that you ought to be good. Because if that other person decides to be bad, then, if there is no God, I feel like being good, and I get this dopamine effect when I do good, but maybe he gets the dopamine effect when he does bad. He does evil and he feels great, he's cool doing that. So how can I prescribe for him that he should do the same types of good things that I think are good, when the result is the same? I get my dopamine this way, he gets it the other way. On the belief that God exists, I want everyone to understand this point, please. It's not because we have a scripture that tells us this is right and that is wrong. It is because God has given us both the scripture and a conscience. And as a result of these two things working together, when we form a conclusion that we ought to be good, just that conclusion, we ought to be good, forget about what exactly is good, just the idea that we ought to be good, that conclusion itself to us is coming as an inspiration from God, both in the scripture and in our consciences that God has given us. That's where the ought to be good comes from. But if we take God out of the picture, some people have the idea that you ought to be good, and some other people have the idea that you ought not to be good. And both of these are on par. It's good for you that way, and it's good for the other person the other way.
Okay. Very interesting, but what you just said has nothing to do whatsoever with secular humanism. First of all, God is off the table. He's not there. All right? And you have to realize what a paradigm shift that is for thinking. So basically what we're saying is, and this is why we have societies, and in a democratic culture we sit down around a table and we figure out what we regard as being beneficial for society and good long-term, short-term, or whatever. So yes, I will say to somebody, you ought not to do that because you are being a bully. You are not allowing that person to live his or her life with reason and whatever. I certainly will say that. But it doesn't depend on there being a supreme being that's going to sit in judgment later. It depends on that person recognizing that I have some say and the culture and society has something to say. So I understand why someone of faith would be guided by the word from their God and their scriptures, and I accept that, but I'm not guided by that because I don't accept, I don't share your faith. So I think we're trying to go down the same path, we're just doing it in a different way. And I have no problem with you saying, well, you know, God guides me to do that. Fine, that's what works for you. I would say, look, it's the responsibility of the individual to do things that are beneficial for his fellow man, and that's what guides me.
My question is for Kirk. You had said earlier that in regards to the greatest of the commandments being that you must love God with, I don't remember the three, all your heart and your body and your soul, and that love is only meaningful when it is free will. Thereby is your ability to choose to not love any of your 6 children. Is that a dangerous thing?
I mean, is it dangerous that I have the choice as to whether or not I will love each one of my 6 children? Is that your question?
Yes, that you can justify saying that you do you believe actually that you can choose to not love any of your children? And if you can, then is that not a dangerous idea to be able to just think your way past this?
Well, yeah, I guess I would say, yeah, I mean, I can choose whether or not I will love any one of my particular children. I just happen to believe that it's morally right, it's the right thing to do to love all of my children, so regardless of who they are. So that's a factor I take into consideration in my free will decisions. My free will decisions are not just simply like a quantum event where it could go this way or that way, but I think these things through. I perform moral deliberation. Am I answering your question?
I think you have. You're saying that
the potential to do
evil. Is there not an obligation in what you said that the morally correct thing is to do this, but it's still your choice?
Yeah.
So you could choose tonight to stop loving your eldest.
Oh yeah, and I have the potential to do all sorts of evil things, but the potential to do something evil is not, it's amoral. It's not right or wrong to have that capability of choosing good or evil. I mean, even in our own justice system here, we don't arrest everybody in the room because each individual has the potential of performing a criminal offense at some point in their life. It's only once they make the decision and carry that out, or even plot to conspire to commit a crime. So, if I understand you correctly, I do have the potential to do evil, including not love one of my children, but that is not a problem. That's as part of free will. Free will is technically defined as the ability to make a decision, has two criteria. Number one, the decision was not determined by any prior events. It's not, and secondly, the agent could have decided otherwise. And so if those two are operative, then it's a free will decision, and free will itself is not an evil thing. It's what we do with it. Choice is not evil, it's what we choose.
Thank you, and I hope that you do inform your children that you are choosing to love them.
As timekeeper, I have the unfortunate task of calling an end to such things, but I am going to just say, just for everyone's sake, that I'm allowing one more question. So it's your lucky day. And that will just give us all a sense of when we'll be closing up. So this will be the last question.
This question is...
Before you ask your question, just, I can't speak for everybody, though I imagine they would be available to respond to people's questions, you know, if you contact them, but if you have a specific question for me and you haven't had a chance to ask it, I do work on campus in the Rafeby House across the way. You can look me up on the university directory, Daniel Levitt. So you can always contact me. It doesn't have to be at the microphone.
I will also note that I will have a set of announcements that have to do with exactly that after the question.
This question is for those who are followers of a religion. You've asked on a couple of occasions tonight about the ability for one without a religion to be able, their ability to be able to produce morals on their own without the assistance of a creator to create these rules. Now, as all of you are members of Abrahamic religion, you are familiar with, I'm sure, the laws listed within Deuteronomy. There are many examples which promote violent acts as ways of following through justice. One of them, for example, meaning for one of the 10 Commandments itself, to keep the Sabbath day holy. For anyone to not keep this day holy, they must be put to death. Now, I'm curious, in the case in which, is it not dangerous to be relying your morality so heavily on a religion which is promoting dangerous acts? What is your opinion on that?
I'll start. So, there are very few people whose religion is the Bible. My religion is based on the Bible, but my religion is really an interpretation of the Bible. So the Bible speaks in strong terms. It teaches us to have strong values, to really keep that Sabbath day sacred, and to care for it very much. What Jewish society is really based off of is the Talmud, which qualifies and enumerates many of the laws and qualifies many of the laws. And so when the Torah talks about putting people to death for violations of sin, the Talmud really comes up with a society that makes it really, really, really difficult to actually put somebody to death for committing that sin, as a recognition of the dangers that you've pointed out, and has created a situation where we've tried to account for that. And some of our greatest sages had pointed out that if they were, to sit on the great court in Jerusalem, the age of the temple, there would never be anyone put to death, and they're actually, the historical record, we're not aware of the Jewish courts that lived according to the Jewish Bible actually putting people to death. And so those statements become statements of value, how important this law is, rather than the actual action of putting somebody to death. And I mean, clearly there's a lot more to say, but that's a one-footed answer to we don't take it so literally.
I'd like to add, you want to say something, Kirk? Go ahead. I wanted to say, I just want to add something quickly, and it's only in the interest of time that I'm butting in so abruptly, otherwise I should have, in courtesy, given Kirk the opportunity here. If we say, because there are some dangerous aspects to religion, let's get rid of religion altogether and then we'll all be fine. Remember, I think it was Daniel who made this point, that in the 20th century we have seen the horrors of non-religion. Look, in 1948, 1945, in the Second World War, the President of the United States and Harry Truman threatened the Japanese people with total annihilation if they will not surrender. Well, they didn't surrender, and what did he do? He authorized the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That was on August 6th. Tens of thousands of people died instantly. The mushroom cloud, you know, rose up over the sky. The Japanese people didn't surrender instantaneously, and what did he do? Three days later, he authorized the bombing of Nagasaki. Again, tens of thousands die instantly. So what is this? And nothing to do with religion. Are we saying then that if we want the world to be right, we get rid of religion and then the world would be honky-dory? No. The fact is that human beings are capable of great evil, but religion is there as a curb on this evil by, in the first place, giving the moral ground for being good. Religion has at the very core the prime motivator for being good, the basic understanding that God created you to be good and therefore you ought to be good, and by being good you're fulfilling what God created you for. It's another question, what exactly must we do to be good? But just the very idea that we must be good, we ought to be good. By instilling this in people, religion in fact does a great good. And without religion, we have no way of instilling that in people. Some people may choose to be good, like our good friend Doug here. We've heard a lot of good things from him and a good philosophy of why he wants to be good. But we cannot transfer that to another person. You cannot sit in a high chair and say, well, because I think this is good, you ought to think it is good as well. It is only in religion that we have what Immanuel Kant called the categorical imperative. And without religion, we don't have that. In fact, I thought religion meant religio, like joining back with God, reconnecting with God, and you explained it differently. Perhaps I have to learn something more about language here. Anyway, I don't want to say anything more because Jamie is going to start getting itchy over the Kirk.
I want to address what you said right at the beginning here, or correct maybe a misconception. The misconception that some people might have is that I or certain religious people might argue that non-theists cannot be good. And I participated in a debate here a few years ago, right here, a formal debate with Christopher DiCarlo. The question was, do we need God for morality? And so I'm on record in that debate as stating that we do have moral intuitions, regardless of whether we're a theist or a non-theist. We have moral intuitions. Now, the book of Romans says we have those moral intuitions because God has placed them within us. So we all have moral intuitions. We can all be good, whether we're a theist or non-theist, as long as we're only interested in comparing ourselves with ourselves. But the real question, I think, is what grounds we have for taking morality seriously. Shabir has raised this a couple of times. It's a huge question. What are our grounds? If there is no ultimate sort of set of moral propositions pertaining to good and evil that are true for all people, all places, and all time, then if you have one group, for example, taking Doug's philosophy that what is best for society is the way to go, and I probably, not accurately represented what he's saying, but just for the sake of argument. But then we have another society that has a different view on what is best for society that might include eliminating, let's say, senior citizens above the age of 65 because they're a drain and so on and so forth. Then we have two competing moral views. And then as soon as we start saying, well, which moral view is better, then we have to start looking at some sort of higher moral principles that transcend the two societies. So I just wanted to correct this, perhaps a misconception, that I'd be arguing that only theists could be good, because that's not true thanks to our God-given moral intuitions.
Can I make a quick comment, please?
Very quick.
Okay. I'm confused. I have religious people sitting on either side of me who are saying that the Word of God, their God, not mine, can be interpreted. And yet God is the absolute in the universe. Well, I mean, I'm quite prepared to challenge Epicurus if he were to walk into this room. I'd lose the debate, I'm sure, but I'd be prepared to challenge him because he gave three sources of pleasure: learning, knowing, and the senses. He forgot all about charity and helping other people. and I'd be prepared to challenge them. But that's normal in a secular humanist world because we debate things all the time, endlessly. But what confuses me is that on one hand I have religious people saying this is the Word of God, and He gave us this Word in the Bible or the Quran or the Hindu writings or whatever, and yet on the other hand saying, well, yeah, but it's open to interpretation, and I don't necessarily follow what's said in the Old Testament because that doesn't. So I guess there's a blend, but I really think that honestly, folks, we have to resolve that situation. If God is in fact the ultimate, and God has given you this Word, and I mean, let's face it, the problem with the Bible is that it's been translated and edited so many times, as has the Quran. But how do you justify that?
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.